Chris, Jerome, thank you so much for making time for our program.
Thanks, David. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I want before we get into a lot of the philosophy about it, I wanted to see if I could find out a little bit about the origin story of the radical independent. What was the moment when you thought I need to start this page?
Yeah, I'm not an activist. I'm not someone who was, oh, we got to change the world. Oh, I got these ideas. I need to get it out there. It was. I don't want to say reluctant, but it was just sort of I don't know, just maybe an intellectual outlet for me, a hobby, something to do. I kind of started off talking a little bit about constitutionalism, citizenship. I kind of had this idea of some highbrow, well, not highbrow, but something a little bit more than your normal social media type of thing. Well, I learned quickly with Facebook that's really not an ideal match. Yeah, very quickly I realized that the silly meme will get 20 times the play as a thoughtful infographic or something editorial or something like that. So I learned quickly. I still wanted to be, in my mind, a little above the fray in terms of politics and the partisanship and all that. But I had to kind of embrace memes and stuff like that, and it's a balance. I think you don't want to sacrifice your message for clicks, but at the same time you need to find a balance to get the word out. And so I feel like I strike the balance there. But yeah, that's kind of how I started. I would say within the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it sort of naturally, organically found its home. I started talking more about the two-party system and a lot of our structural issues, and it was really, it just sort of happened on its own. Like I said, I started kind of vague and talking about some kind of a lot of random things, but it soon turned into sort of this pro-independent thought, but also sort of independent political landscape, and sort of an anti-duopoly. I describe it as a corrupt, rigged duopoly, and so it just sort of formed naturally, and that was nice. It just kind of I stumbled into it.
Well, we'll get into some more of that. I like the branding. I mean, it's a great branding. You said it's kind of interesting to hear it read back to you, but I've often said that sort of it's like being calm is sort of a radical thing, right? So you use the word radical in radical independent, and I guess you're sort of saying that's a radical move to remain independent. So what makes it radical, in our here in 2026 America?
Yeah, it is kind of an ironic name, because in our very tribal, polarized times, a lot of extremism, it seems. It's kind of a radical move to stay centered, to be independent, to not engage, to not play that partisan game that seems everyone seems to want to be involved in. It's like a team sport, And so I just thought, well, it's those of us who have principles and are kind of this, we're not going to be pawns in that sort of manipulation that we see in you know in our political landscape.
Yeah, and to me, there's a bravery to it too, right? Because it's like to question, what many might think is kind of your own side. Weren't you on my side? Why are you saying these things that question, our side, quote unquote? So there's sort of a bravery aspect to it too. At least I see that.
There is. I feel like I can get. I would have done a lot better if I had picked a side and went all in, right? It's
Right.
hated by both sides, and people don't understand you, and people, you gotta take it from both ends there. But I think, part of the whole radical thing too is that you know, it's a nonpartisan page, and we tend to be fairly centrist in sort of our outlook, and but not timid, not feeble. I mean, there's a radicalness to it, to where it's like, no, we're going to stand up and say something. Like, our, we feel this country is kind of getting taken from us. It's been hijacked, and so we need to fight back, appropriately, and in a proper manner. But I felt like the radical was also like, hey, we're serious about this. This is a big deal. We're gonna fight for what we believe.
Yeah, well, and we get a lot of that. If you try to be quote unquote nonpartisan, people start throwing out, both sidesism. For one, that's one accusation. Just kind of you're just mushy middle. You have no take on anything. You don't have any principles or whatever. Um, so, do you get that? And what how does that affect you, and how do you respond to it?
I do get that a lot. Actually, that's one of the main criticisms, I guess, of that I come across on the page. People want me to focus on one thing, one aspect. They think there's some sort of one size fits all magic formula. Do this and everything will be wonderful. But I'm just more. I take a broader approach, and I think all kinds of ideas need to be looked at and implemented and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm not real judgmental when it comes to the sorts of reforms we need to look into. But yeah, the both sidesism is probably the main one. I guess to be expected. It's confusing in a very partisan political reality that we live in. But I want the page to be nonpartisan. I want people of various political parties, ideologies, backgrounds. I want to me, this is a broad coalition of people who can come together, not necessarily united in policy, but united in we have a broken system. We have issues that we need to deal with. It doesn't serve any of us. And in that respect, we need to work together to get the changes that we need. So it's a more open system, free, fair, competitive elections.
Yeah. Well, so let's do that a little bit. Let's clarify before we start going into the, proposed solutions. Let's clarify the problem a little bit. You describe, we're not the only one saying this, but that the two-party system is basically corrupt and rigged. So let's just go into that a little bit. How is it rigged? Is it ballot access laws, primary systems, campaign finance, all of them, all of the above? What are some ways that the system is rigged?
Yeah. So when I went into this, I think a lot of us have this general feeling of things aren't right. Behind the curtain, there's systems that are things. But as I've learned over the past several years, learning more about this, talking with other people kind of in the movement and stuff like that, it's pretty bad. I feel like there's systemic issues for sure. There's structural rules in place that favor the two-party system, not only just the two-party system, but that's a phrase I use a lot, the corrupt rigged duopoly, because I feel like there's a lot of corruption and they've rigged the system to make it nearly impossible for independents or third parties to really gain any traction. A lot of this starts with ballot access laws, which are very unfair in most states. Huge obstacles and hurdles the non-major parties got to jump through to get on the ballot, and then they're going to get sued half the time off the ballot. The two-party system has the resources and the connections and the wherewithal to basically keep us sort of trapped in that. But you also have our voting methods with first past the post with plurality voting. So I'm a big fan of ranked choice voting or something similar to that. I'm also one of the only people I think on the internet. There's one other guy I know who has the idea of independent primaries, which is kind of a separate thing, but that's a structural issue, giving independents their own primary. But yeah, there's a lot of systemic issues where they've kind of rigged the system. I mean, when you've been controlling election laws for 125 years, why worry about competition when you get to write the rules, right? But in a lot of ways, subtle and not so subtle. There's also the social cultural aspect of it with the media, with the dynamic of lesser evil voting, where people are essentially trapped. Lee Drutman talks, I'm sure you've heard of his books. He's on, but he talks about a doom loop, right? How we're stuck, and basically by pitting Americans against each other, and you become more fearful, more extreme, more polarized, and it's a reinforcing feedback loop, right? But there's these sort of social, cultural aspects that keep people mentally trapped in that paradigm, along with all the structural problems. Everything from legislative rules, and most legislatures, including Congress, has all kinds of crazy partisan rules that really only allow for a two-party setup. Yeah, there's a lot of ways, and people don't really understand that. I think, in a vague sense, they probably feel, well, it's just inevitable. inevitable. It's just the way it is. There's nothing that can be done about it. But I think no, it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, we can implement reforms and change how we think and do politics.
Yeah, well, so let's get into that a little bit. There's like a YouGov. There was like a YouGov publication. They identified, I don't know, over 100, large number of issues, which people across that self-identify as Democrat and Republican, were more or less aligned with. Not like, 100% aligned or 90-10 or anything, but it would be like 70-60 or 80-60 or something like that, right? To where these were like 100 issues that people across what we call the political spectrum, at least self-identified that way, sort of agree on those issues. So there's obviously a whole bunch of issues that we could say, oh yeah, we sort of agree on what a good solution to this issue is, but we
Right.
don't ever work on those. Like those aren't the ones. The politicians almost don't want to work on those because they want to work on these ones that are more divisive, right?
Right. That doesn't help the party. People working together. That's not going to help us win elections and control the
Right.
government. Right. So in a sense, we do have a broken system where the incentives aren't there. The incentives are actually the opposite. You have to go out and cause controversy and whip people up and engage in emotional tribalism and toxic dysfunction because it's easy and it works. And you're right. I've seen a couple different, not really studies, but almost experiments. One of them is a group called Helena. Well, they'll take people of different backgrounds and different political ideologies, sit them down in a room, and if they engage in a respectful way, one on one, the amount of productive discussion that can occur in the right dynamic, in the right setting, if you set things up the right way. But our system is not set up for that. It's yeah, that's unfortunate. And you bring up a good point. 50 states, all this different election law, and then you got the federal level. It's like it's not going to be easy. I mean, this is not a easy thing to do, and I think that's one of the problems. I think that's why people don't see a way out. But I think you do need to. I'm all about just spreading the word. I don't know what number that is, or what percentage, but I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction. You see the rise of independent voters and a lot of other things that you could look at, surveys, polls, whatnot. I think at some point you reach an inflection point where suddenly it becomes a viable thing, where people are going to put electoral reforms first. They see how this is a dead end road, how this constant back and forth binary partisanship is kind of killing us. Um, for me, it's about getting the message out.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about running the page. You say you're out to get the message out there. So, and you mentioned a couple things about Facebook already, but I'm curious, you know, what you've learned about running a page like this. Like you said, you have to, sort of play the meme game a little bit more to keep engagement. Is there anything else that you've noticed about what kind of posts get engagement?
I tell you, there's no rhyme or reason. It's insane. I will put a post that I think is amazing and great information. Maybe it's hilarious, and it gets hardly any play. And then I'll post something else, and it goes nuts. And I can't figure it out. In the beginning, it was tough. It's tough in the beginning. I learned pretty quickly that growing a page means dollars. You have to basically pay to what they call a boost a post or run an ad. And so I think your growth is directly correlated to the amount of money you put in. But now I've noticed that once you get about 10,000 follows, it starts to be a little bit more self-generating, self-sustaining, kind of just organic growth. I feel like once you get a certain point, at least that's been my experience.
Hmm.
I've also noticed that there's a lot of ugly. I mean, I'm not a naive person, but oh my goodness, with this page, there's a lot of posts, comments that are just really bad, really crude, insulting stuff. And, I delete that right away. And sometimes I ban them or block them. This is not just a post for anybody, random person on the internet to post, regurgitate whatever they want. I curate this page. I determine what's going to be on it, and I want to present a certain, appearance and message. But yeah, I'll block them. It's just bad. It's some really hateful stuff. That was
What's the nature? I mean, what's it usually targeted at? Like, what's some of the triggers for that?
uh really, it's just people, very extreme partisans who hate the other side, and so they demonize the other side. We need to end their bloodline. Violent or racist, or I don't know. It's just strange to me that people would think like that. But I guess with the internet, obviously anybody can get on there and say whatever they want. And maybe before pre-internet, those people were kind of out of sight, out of mind, but not anymore. But yeah, that was a little surprising for me. Um, yeah, I feel like a lot of people don't know how to engage in civil discourse and reasonable. Just the level of discourse can be quite low. And this isn't, and they're not a horrible person or saying something terribly, something terrible, but it's a partisan jab. I will hide comments sometimes, but usually I'll just either ignore them. I I will occasionally respond, and the main reason I'll respond to any sort of post really is so that other people can see how I deal with it, and it's more about expressing my ideas in this conversation. Um,
And also modeling,
I'm not doing it for the person who posted it.
right?
They I'm doing it for anyone else who comes by and looks at that conversation. They understand the page, me, where I'm coming from, stuff like that.
Right.
So I don't try to change minds. Really, that's not what I'm doing. I'm presenting information. These are some ideas. These are my thoughts. They can change. They have changed. I'm about sharing information. I post articles where some of it's okay, but I don't even agree with necessarily with the whole thing. It's just content for people to look at, think about, right? We can have discussions. I'm not interested in converting people in a partisan sense or anything like that. That's not why I made the page, right? So yeah, in terms of those people who are posting questionable comments and stuff like that, I don't know. It's a I play it by ear, and there's the delete, there's the hide, and there's a respond, and it just kind of depends maybe what we're
Yeah. Well, and you were saying you mentioned just there that you've changed some of your thinking through the process of managing this page. What are some examples, or maybe just one example of sort of what's a belief that you have changed, or maybe just softened on?
well, I think I just in terms of the way I think about things in general, political, social, political things. I think I have a lot more patience now, whereas I would want to get to an answer right away or make a point right away. And now I just have a lot more patience dealing with other people and engaging in discussions. Grace, I've gained a lot of grace, and just hey, I'm not going to be as judgmental, and so it's a lot of these, I guess, more subtle ways of thinking in terms of big ideas. Like I said, I started off kind of talking about a variety of things, and it just sort of naturally formed. It's hard to get meta sometimes, to think about my own thinking.
Right.
But I've also, besides caring less about convincing others, really, I've realized basically how deep rooted some of these issues are. Like, we we have just have this vague idea, this feeling of dread. But now I could actually see, well, these are some of those aspects that are causing these sorts of things. I just feel like I've learned a lot in terms of the issues, and how deep rooted some of these problems are. And and people bring up interesting ideas, ways to deal with things. I've had people talk about proportional representation, multi-member districts, sortition, a lot of interesting ideas which I hadn't really thought about before. Which so just learning more about the issues involved in this type of thing.
Have you thought about taking some of these ideas? Facebook is a little superficial, like it's kind of hard to go deep on Facebook. Have you thought about, starting something like a Substack and going a little deeper with some of these ideas?
It's just a time thing, really.
Right.
I mentioned, maybe this summer I'm going to look to sort of add an Instagram account, which I guess in the big scheme of things isn't that much different than Facebook, but it does bring in another audience, more audience possibly. And that's been one of the great things I think in the 4 years I've been doing since I made the page is I've met great people, basically online, but just really neat people who care, who have great ideas. They're smart, and so I've kind of expanded my circle, my online little circle here, and that's been one of the best things about the page. Really, is just coming into contact with more like-minded people. Really,
Well, Chris, Jerome, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with us, and everybody go check out Radical Independent on Facebook.
great. Thank you.
Take care. Bye bye.